Hey guys, tonight we're taking you deep into the Jordanian desert, where sandstone cliffs glow pink at sunset and ancient mysteries bake quietly under the sun. You're not here for high drama or action-packed battles. No, tonight you're walking through a city carved straight from the cliffs, where the biggest riddle isn't some lost treasure or buried scroll, it's stone furniture. Yep, sofas, lounges, recliners, thousands of years old, and not in cozy living rooms, but out in the open, exposed to dust storms and camel traffic. You'll pass an elegant stone bench shaped just so, and all you can think is, who looked at a cliff face and thought, you know what this needs? A love seat. It's weird. It's quiet. It's kind of perfect for falling asleep to. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing the spread of sleepy historians around the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into Petra like it's a mirage come to life. Rosy cliffs rising in the distance, then suddenly looming around you in full sun, scorched glory. This isn't some tiny tourist site. It's a carved metropolis, tucked away in winding valleys and towering canyons. The kind of place that makes your shoes dusty and your sense of time irrelevant. The narrow passage into the city, called the Sikh, feels more like a magical portal than a trail. Towering walls stretch so high you crane your neck just to see slivers of sky, and then it opens suddenly, almost rudely, into the iconic view, the treasury. That famous facade, more cathedral than cash vault, its stone columns glowing rose gold in the light. You know the one. It's the backdrop in every Petra travel reel, and that one Indiana Jones movie your dad probably rewatched too often. But you don't stop at the treasury. Tonight, you're going deeper. Your feet crunch over ancient stones and wind, polished sand as you begin to notice the city's weirder details. Sure, the Nabataeans built tombs and temples, but what's with all the places to sit? Carved ledges, smooth, edged benches, even what can only be described as full-on cliff couches. They're everywhere. Some are tucked into the sides of ceremonial tombs, others lounging openly in empty courtyards. Always carved directly into the rock. Always just sitting there, like they're waiting. You brush your hand over one. The stone is warm from the sun and surprisingly smooth, like it's been sat on for centuries. Maybe it has. Maybe you're late to a meeting that's 2,000 years overdue. Historians still argue whether these things were meant for the living, the dead, or both. Some think they were thrones for community leaders or spiritual ceremonies. Others argue they were benches for public gatherings. A few lean toward more mundane uses, places to rest during long days of trade and toil. But no one agrees, and the Nabataeans left behind precious few inscriptions to clue us in. It's like they expected us to just get it. Classic ancient people move. Fun fact, Nabataean carvers used iron tools to shape these cliff sofas. Iron against sandstone, a bold combo that gave them smooth finishes and sharp angles. But not everyone had access to those tools. Some of the lesser seen couches are rougher, lumpier, like ancient IK prototypes built without the manual. A little known tidbit. Some of the benches might have been tied to astrology. Yeah, apparently certain carved spots line up eerily with solstices and equinoxes. One theory says the Nabataeans could have lounged in these spots to observe celestial events. Imagine ancient stargazing parties, feet up on stone, sipping fermented date wine under desert skies. There's also something unusually intimate about them. These aren't big arenas or sprawling temples. They're cozy. Like a group of 5 could gather, recline, and chat or chant without yelling. You get the sense that whatever happened here wasn't for crowds. It was for insiders, regulars, people who knew which rock sofa was the spot on festival days. But here's the kicker, the Nabataeans never wrote down why they did this. We have trade records, some inscriptions, a few graffiti squiggles. More on those later, but no stone memo that says, "This is the Netflix couch." So, we're left squinting at them through a modern lens, asking impossible questions. Were they sacred? Practical? Just a show of wealth? Maybe they were the ancient version of, "Hey, check out my terrace view." Meanwhile, a fringe theory claims some benches were cooling stations. Petra gets hot, like triple-digit lizard, melting hot, and carving a stone bench into the shady side of a canyon. Genius move for chilling out, literally, especially when paired with clever Nabataean water channels that redirected precious cool water across the city. Hydration and a breeze. 5-star luxury. As you stroll past yet another stone seat, this one more throne than sofa, your mind starts to relax into the rhythm of it all. Rock, cut rooms, niches, benches, repeating over and over, like a soft chant in architectural form. The sun dips lower, throwing long shadows, and you realize something else in Petra. Even the shadows look carved. Maybe that's the point. Maybe these sofas weren't just furniture. They were statements. Symbols that said we live here. We shape the cliffs to our comfort. And if you're visiting, sit down. Rest. Take it in. You probably won't survive this desert forever, but for now, enjoy the view. You keep walking through Petra, the crunch of gravel beneath your sandals now a soft, familiar rhythm. The city unfolds slowly, deliberately, like it wants you to take your time, like it knows your modern brain isn't used to thinking in centuries. Here, every curve of rock has been coaxed into form, and every path leads you to something once important, though often annoyingly vague. This place wasn't just for drama or royalty. It was a working city, the Nabataean capital, a hub of commerce, culture, and camel caravans, all crisscrossing the desert with fragrant spices, silk, incense, and more of that mysteriously popular frankincense. Seriously, everyone back then seemed obsessed with it. Petra was their meeting point, a kind of ancient truck stop / marketplace / Instagrammable canyon resort. But the really wild part, it wasn't just the stunning tombs or elaborate facades that made Petra hum. It was water. Glorious, desert-defying water. Historians agree on this part, at least. The Nabataeans were basically desert hydrologists with flair. They didn't just build pretty structures. They engineered entire water systems into the mountainsides. Channels, cisterns, underground pipes, you name it. Water flowed through Petra like it was some natural oasis, though it was anything but. It was planned. Controlled. Sculpted, like everything else here. And guess what? Those carved stone sofas you keep passing. A few of them sit suspiciously close to old water collection areas. Coincidence? Possibly. But maybe they were strategically placed as waiting spots, gossip corners, or ceremonial seats near essential city features. Because if you've ever waited for someone to fill a jug from a slow trickle of water, you know a comfy rock bench starts to sound pretty appealing. The layout of the city reflects this water obsession. You'll see wide, open courtyards with shallow channels underfoot, almost like veins pulsing through stone. You'll pass stairways that lead not to temples, but to reservoirs. And then you spot something quirky, a carved basin near a sofa, shaped just right for a small pool or maybe hand washing. Hygiene? Ritual? Poolside nap spot? Historians still argue whether these setups were sacred or just impressively sanitary. Here's something you probably didn't expect in a story about dusty cliffs. Petra had climate control. Okay, not exactly air conditioning, but smart design. The Nabataeans built with airflow in mind, carving their structures into shaded cliff sides and aligning entrances with the movement of the sun. The interiors of their homes, yes, carved straight into the stone, stayed cooler than the scorching outdoors. In the middle of a desert, they pulled off passive cooling without even one solar panel or ceiling fan. Respect. Now, let's talk about the sound. Petra isn't just visually quiet. It sounds quiet. As you pass through its winding alleys and open courtyards, there's this weird, calming echo. The carved walls bounce your footsteps back at you softly, like the cliffs are whispering, "Slow down." Even the wind behaves differently here, brushing past you with a low, sandy hush, and that hush gets broken only occasionally by more evidence of everyday life. Potsherds, worn steps, maybe even the stub of a stone table. You imagine kids running past, traders yelling prices, goats bleeding somewhere off-screen. This wasn't just a ceremonial city, people lived here, which makes all the sofas even stranger. Like, who needs this many carved seats? Quick fringe theory break. Some archaeologists think Petra had seasonal populations, sort of like ancient snowbirds. People came when trade was good or festivals were on, then packed up when things got dull. In that model, maybe the sofas weren't for lounging every day, but for peak season gatherings. Imagine it desert pop uptown, but make it luxury. Now for your daily dose of weirdness. There's a spot in Petra where several stone benches are arranged in a semicircle, facing a central flat slab. A ceremonial space, a debate club, a really ambitious picnic area. No one knows. But one theory suggests it was a kind of open-air courtroom, with the judge on the central slab and spectators on the couches. Ancient Judge Judy, but make it sandstone. And yet, despite the grandeur and cleverness, the vibe is strikingly casual. You don't feel like you're walking through the Louvre. You feel like you've stumbled into a place where people genuinely hung out. They carved things to last, sure, but not necessarily to impress strangers 2,000 years later. It's like they built their version of urban comfort, and that just happened to involve embedding furniture into cliffs. You pause by a particularly smooth stone bench tucked under a natural overhang. It's shady, a bit cool to the touch, and just wide enough for two people to sit and argue about grain prices. Or whisper gossip. Or flirt Nabataean style. No one can say for sure, but it definitely feels like it meant something once. Maybe the boring beauty of it all is the point. Maybe Petra wasn't meant to dazzle in every corner. Maybe it was meant to function, to be lived in. And maybe, just maybe, the people who carved all these seats didn't think of them as mysterious or symbolic. Maybe they were just tired. Maybe they just wanted to sit down. You take a slow step forward, your hand trailing along another carved bench, this one lower, slightly slanted, like a lazy recliner someone chiseled into being. It's not in front of a temple or tucked into some ceremonial nook. It's just there, in what looks like an alley or a wide corridor between rock faces, which makes you pause. Why would a desert culture so laser, focused on water and trade, bother to sculpt places just to sit? You glance around. No inscription. No statue. Just this smooth little rock couch in the shade. And it hits you this wasn't a throne. It wasn't sacred. It might have just been for chilling. That's when things get properly confusing. Historians have long debated whether Petra's carved benches were functional, symbolic, or ceremonial, and they still don't agree. The practical camp argues these were places for rest, maybe for socializing during long trade days. Picture dusty travelers flopping down beside each other, sipping water, and swapping news about camel rotes and market gossip. One theory says some of these were even business spots where traders sat to negotiate deals over incense, spices, or textiles. Petra was a trade epicenter. After all, why not build in a few negotiation lounges? On the other side of the academic sofa, squabble are those who say, no way, these were sacred spaces. They point to carvings near tombs or water sanctuaries and argue the benches were made for rituals, places to sit in silence, maybe meditate or commune with ancestors. The Nabataeans were known to have a spiritual reverence for water and death. Combine the two, and you might end up with a rock couch by a holy spring, carved not for napping but for divine reflection. Some benches, especially those near tombs, appear deliberately oriented towards specific views, mountain peaks, water channels, or even celestial alignments. So maybe these weren't just seats, maybe they were viewpoints. Nabataean style front porches for pondering the cosmos. And then there's the third category, the performative theory. This one's fun. Some scholars believe the benches were made to be seen using them. social seating, strategic lounging. A sort of yes, I recline here, and you may observe me being fancy. It's possible some of these benches were status symbols, elevated, front-facing, perfect for people, watching or being watched. Think ancient Instagram angles, but in stone. You step into another open courtyard. This one has 3 benches, 2 facing each other, one slightly elevated. Were these part of a ritual, a tribunal, or maybe just where the Nabataean version of brunch happened? No one knows. But your eyes catch a faint depression in the stone, right in the center. A serving spot, a footrest, or the worst idea for a fire pit ever. Modern archaeologists have tried recreating these spaces. A few even brought in ergonomics experts to study the angles. Turns out, some of these rock sofas are surprisingly comfortable. Others, not so much. One researcher reportedly described a specific Petra bench as perfect for spinal regret, which honestly sounds about right for a society with no memory foam. A quirky tidbit for you, some benches show faint decorative patterns, simple lines, or shallow reliefs. Nothing flashy, just enough to say, someone put care into this, which supports the theory that they weren't purely practical. If you're carving cushions into stone, maybe you're trying to impress. Or maybe you're just a bored artisan with a flair for flair. You pause to sit down, just for a moment. The stone beneath you is cool, even as the air stays hot. Around you, lizards skitter across sun-baked walls. A breeze moves through the canyon like a sleepy sigh. It's easy to imagine a conversation here, 2 people, robes dusted with desert sand, sharing stories and shade. This bench might have known laughter, maybe arguments, maybe silence. And here's where Petra really messes with you. It's full of these spaces. Not 1, not 10, but dozens, maybe hundreds. A city of carved couches, built into the bones of the land. Why would a society invest this much time and comfort when survival was a daily task? Maybe that's exactly the answer. Maybe these seats were a defiance of the desert. A way to say, we're not just surviving, we're lounging. Because let's be real, carving furniture into rock isn't a bare minimum move. It's extra. It's a flex. It's Nabataean feng shui with a sandstone chisel. Historians still argue whether this culture leaned more toward ritualism or practicality, but Petra's layout suggests both. You've got sacred spaces and street-level logic all woven together. And these sofas? They blur the line perfectly. Too functional to be purely symbolic, too artful to be accidental. As twilight creeps in, casting purple shadows across the cliffs, you start to notice how even the light plays into the architecture. Some benches catch the last golden slivers of sun. Others slip into cool darkness early, perfect for afternoon rest. Coincidence? Or ancient design? Either way, you're beginning to see that in Petra. To sit was to claim space. To carve a bench was to declare, someone will return here. It's a gesture of permanence in a place that's always shifting. Under sand, wind, time. And somehow the idea of a civilization obsessed with both water engineering and comfortable sitting makes the Nabataeans feel weirdly relatable. You shuffle into another chamber, half-shadowed, faintly echoing, the air just a bit cooler than the canyon outside. The walls curve gently, the sandstone soft and undulating like frozen wind, and against the far wall you see it again, a carved bench, wider this time, more refined. Edges squared, corners rounded. Definitely not a shelf or a step. This is intentional. This is a seat. But here's the kicker. It's in a tomb. And now things get strange. This isn't some grand palace or city square. It's a burial chamber, the final resting place for someone who, thousands of years ago, was deemed important enough to be interred in Petra's sacred stone. And someone, possibly the deceased themselves, or the craftsman who carved this whole place, thought it was a good idea to include a place to sit. So you do what any respectful time traveler would: you sit down. Immediately, the temperature shift is noticeable. The stone is cooler than outside, the air still. Your ears pick up the faintest whistle of wind through a nearby crack, but otherwise it's silent. Heavy, almost. The kind of silence that makes you instinctively lower your voice, even in your thoughts. Which raises the question, why is there a sofa in the tomb? One popular theory is that these benches were part of ritual mourning, that after a burial, family or priests would gather in this cool stone room, sit in silence or prayer, and commune with the spirit of the departed. The idea being that the physical presence of the living was necessary, even after death. And the benches, they made that possible. A space not just for the dead, but for the living who refused to leave right away. Another take, it was all about banqueting with the dead. And yes, that's exactly what it sounds like. Some historians believe these tombs were used for commemorative feasts, where families would gather around the carved benches, bring in food, and dine in honor of their ancestors. Think of it like a yearly family reunion. Only, with a lot more incense and slightly fewer selfies. This theory is backed up by archaeological finds in similar Nabataean tombs, crumbs of ancient food, fragments of pottery, scorch marks from lanterns. It paints a picture that's both eerie and deeply human, loved ones gathering to remember, grieve, and maybe even laugh, sitting shoulder to shoulder in stone silence, breaking bread with ghosts. Then there's the fringe angle, always good for stirring the sleepy brain. Some scholars propose that the couches were symbolic. They weren't meant for literal sitting, but to represent comfort in the afterlife. Imagine a Nabataean elite reclining forever on their custom chiseled rock sofa, sipping wine in the hereafter. Kind of like a desert version of being buried with your favorite Lazit boy. There's some evidence to support this idea. In certain tombs, the benches are carved with precision, but placed in ways that make practical use awkward. Too high, too shallow, or tucked behind pillars. It's like they were never meant to be sat on in life, just admired, or remembered. Historians still argue whether these carvings were functional or purely funerary. The line between the two gets blurry fast, especially when you realize that some of these benches appear in pairs. One for the living, one for the dead. Dual arrangements that seem to say, you sit here, they sit there, but you're still together. Another quirky discovery. In a few tombs, the backs of the benches are carved with symbols, geometric patterns, stylized flowers, maybe even tiny animals. Not enough to be full on murals, but enough to suggest care, attention, personality. Like someone wanted these to feel furnished in a way that only the Nabataeans could pull off with a hammer and a hunch. You start to imagine how this scene might have looked. A family enters, the older members holding small oil lamps. They lay offerings on the flat stone shelf near the body. They lower themselves onto the benches, robes whispering against the sandstone. The room flickers with firelight. Someone sings, or prays, or maybe just stares ahead in silence, lost in thought. The dead don't speak, but the benches hold space for the living to remember. Outside, the sun continues its ancient arc, indifferent. But in here, time pools like water. You sit a little longer, caught between past and present, unsure where one ends and the other begins. And then a detail catches your eye. Above the bench, barely noticeable unless the light hits just right, is a faint indentation. Not writing exactly, but something that looks like it might have once been a name. Maybe a date, maybe just a mark. It's eroded now, worn down by centuries of air and touch, and maybe a bit of Nabataean apathy. But it reminds you that someone carved this, intentionally, with meaning, even if we'll never fully know what that meaning was. You run your fingers across the bench's surface. There are dips where hands have likely rested. A soft curve on one edge, like a hip favored that spot. It's not just a seat, it's a memory fossil. And maybe that's what makes these tomb sofas so fascinating. They're not just relics of ritual, they're echoes of comfort. Someone thought, let's make this place a little softer. Even in stone. Even in death. It's both wildly impractical and heartbreakingly human. And as you rise from the cool bench, and step back into the glowing canyon light, you wonder in the end, isn't that what we all want? A place to rest, to be remembered, and maybe, just maybe, to recline in peace. The light outside the tomb hits you like a warm sigh, golden and soft in that late afternoon way that makes shadows stretch forever. You blink, recalibrating from the cool gloom of the chamber to the wide, open calm of Petra's winding canyons. Somewhere nearby, the wind kicks up just enough sand to remind you that this place, for all its stillness, is never truly silent. You turn a corner and find yourself in a spot that seems, at first, unremarkable. Just another section of cliff wall, etched with the tired scars of time. But then you see it, a strange little alcove, almost fully eroded, its edges crumbled like stale cake. Inside it, a stubby, half-missing sofa, or maybe a bench, or a throne, or a platform. Honestly, it's hard to tell anymore. Whatever it once was, time has taken its toll. Still, something about it draws you in. You crouch close, brushing sand away with your hand, like you're revealing treasure. And in a way you are. Not gold or scrolls, but something quieter. A shape. A decision someone made long ago. A reason we'll probably never fully understand. That's Petra in a nutshell. Everything here feels deliberate, but undocumented. A city that shouts with stone and whispers with meaning. It's a place of half-answers. Like this bench. Was it ceremonial? Domestic? Did someone carve it just because they had a free afternoon and an artistic streak? Historians still argue whether Petra's furniture, carvings were part of formal design schemes, or if some were, well, personal projects. See, the Nabataeans weren't entirely uniform in their building style. Sure, they had common techniques, but local flair was a thing. Some researchers believe that certain carved elements were added after the fact, unofficial edits to public or family spaces. Imagine Dad deciding to carve a comfy spot into the family tomb because Grandma complained her back hurt during offerings. And then there's the idea of erosion as narrative. As you examine the faded edges of the cliff bench, it occurs to you that some of these carvings weren't always mysterious. When they were fresh, they might have looked obvious. Familiar? Useful. But sandstone is soft, Petra's famed pink cliffs are beautiful, and heartbreakingly fragile. The details erode, blur, vanish, and what we're left with today, a kind of architectural game of telephone, half lost in the wind. Sometimes the walls seem to whisper, but you can't quite make out what they're saying. Nearby, another feature catches your eye. A small ledge, barely a handspan wide, but with just enough of a curve to suggest it once held something. A jug, an oil lamp, someone's travel bag made of goat hair and good intentions. No one knows. But it's those little moments, those almost benches, those nearly shelves, that make Petra feel like a memory half awake. You start to notice these ambiguous features everywhere. Ledges that might have been seats, alcoves that could have held idols or snacks, steps that go nowhere, lines that were once inscriptions now just whispers in stone. Petra's architecture isn't just worn down by time, it's rewritten by it. There's one particularly haunting wall near the edge of a cliff, not far from the city's outer limits. At first glance, it's bare, just rock. But if you stare long enough, let your eyes soften, and the shadows do their work, you start to see them faint, almost accidental indentations in the surface, like figures, shapes, faces. A fringe theory says these were part of a forgotten Nabataean ritual. Spirits carved shallowly, so they'd fade with time, released as erosion took them, the spiritual equivalent of biodegradable art. Quirky fact time, one archaeologist once reported finding what looked suspiciously like a carved footstool in a shaded grotto. A footstool. In a desert. Attached to nothing. Just there. We're not saying the Nabataeans invented the recliner, but we're not saying it either. And then there's the graffiti. Not modern stuff, although there's plenty of that. No, this is ancient graffiti, Nabataean inscriptions, Greek letters, even a few images. Doodles of animals, abstract spirals, what might be a camel, or a ghost, or someone's idea of a joke. These aren't grand carvings. They're quick, scratched, casual, like someone sitting on a bench with a sharp tool and too much time. Just imagine it, a tired caravan guard scrawling, camels rule, into the wall while waiting for his shift to end. Historians still argue whether this graffiti was sacred, satirical, or just Nabataean teenagers being Nabataean teenagers. Some of it appears near tombs, possibly prayers or names. Other bits show up in odd spots, like the ceiling of a tiny chamber that couldn't fit more than 2 people crouched together. Cozy. But what really gets you is the layering. Sometimes graffiti is carved right over faded inscriptions, as if generations of people used the same space, each adding their own mark. It's messy, it's human, and it's deeply comforting. Because for all the debate about Petra's big ticket mysteries, how the water flowed, how the temples were aligned, what the treasury was actually for, it's these small, half-erased details that give the city its soul. You look again at that crumbling sofa-shaped shadow in the rock. It's nothing. It's everything. It's a mark of presence, faded by time, carried by wind, made sacred by nobody and everybody. And as the wind picks up again, brushing across your cheek with a dry, dusty kiss, you finally understand what the walls are trying to say. They're saying, "We're here." Let your feet carry you uphill now, toward the upper terraces of Petra, the kind of path that forces a slower pace and rewards it with breeze and silence. From up here, the city opens up below like a forgotten jigsaw puzzle of carved walls, hollowed tombs, and sandy pathways snaking between them. But nestled in this quiet, shaded elevation is something unexpected: pillars. Columns, to be precise. Tall, fluted, unapologetically Roman columns. Wait, Roman? Yep. Right in the heart of Nabataean territory. You approach them cautiously, almost suspiciously, like they're party crashers who arrived centuries too late. They rise from a temple platform with elegant indifference, their styles more suited to the forum than the desert. And yet, here they are, baked into Petra's narrative. This is the Kasral, Bint, the main temple of Petra. Once a showpiece of Nabataean religion and power, it now stands as a hybrid monument to cultural cross-pollination. You walk among the stone foundations, feeling the ghosts of multiple architectural styles pressing in on you. Roman influence here isn't a mystery. It's a fact. After all, the Romans annexed the Nabataean kingdom in 1 or 6 CE. But here's the twist: the blending started before the conquest. The Nabataeans were not isolationists. They were mixers, adapters, remixers before remixing was cool. Their trade networks brought in ideas as easily as incense. They saw Roman design, thought nice columns, and just went ahead and added them to their toolkit. So now you've got rock-cut tombs inspired by Assyrian facades, temples with Corinthian capitals, and public squares straight out of a Mediterranean daydream. It's like walking through a historical mashup playlist, but even here among the Roman echoes, the Nabataean sofa mania continues. You circle around the temple and find, yes, of course, another carved bench. Low, wide, sun-warmed. Maybe a place for temple priests to rest between rituals, or for travelers to wait their turn to offer tribute. Or perhaps it was just a nice place to sit and look fancy in front of some imported architecture. Whatever the reason, it's proof again that these people love their stone seating. Here's a quirky tidbit. Archaeological digs at this site uncovered fragments of frescoes and stucco that once adorned the walls. Bright colors, painted patterns. The Nabataeans didn't want their temples to blend into the background. They wanted them to pop, and you can bet that any nearby bench had a front row seat to that visual drama. Historians still argue whether these Greco-Roman borrowings diluted Nabataean identity or enriched it. Some say Petra lost its edge by mimicking its imperial neighbors. Others argue that the city's ability to adopt and adapt is what made it special in the first place. You decide to side with the pragmatists. If you're running a desert super hub, why not go full aesthetic fusion? Especially when it means more places to sit, Because even in this grand temple precinct, amid all the grandeur and imported stone flair, you still see it the echo of everyday life. Crumbled stairs, door frames worn by hands. And yes, the smooth curve of benches carved not for gods or emperors, but for people with sore feet. And then there's the falafel. Okay, not literally, but the smell of herbs and spice lingers in your imagination as you pass what might have been a market area. Stalls long gone, but traces remain: storage niches, channels for water, shaded alcoves. Maybe here, just outside the temple, food vendors once sold roasted chickpeas or fried bread to worshippers and merchants alike. And maybe those same worshippers needed a place to eat. And maybe, just maybe, that's why there's a stone sofa right here in the sun. Because nothing pairs with divine worship like a snack and a seat. You find one last clue that cements it: a bench with a shallow dip in the middle, like a spot worn down by thousands of people leaning in, elbow to elbow. Not dramatic, not decorative, just used. It tells you everything you need to know. The Nabataeans weren't just architects of beauty. They were architects of experience. They didn't just carve for the eyes, they carved for the body. The moment, the vibe, the fusion of Roman pillars and Arabian script, of tombs beside trade routes, of water next to stone couches, it all fits. And somehow, it all feels chill. You sit again, this time near the columns, letting the setting sun do its thing. The rock glows orange. The shadows stretch like cats, and for a few minutes, you forget that time is a thing that moves. Because in Petra, it really doesn't. Not in any way that matters. You wake from a brief daze, is not a real nap, but that Petra-induced trance where time slides sideways and find yourself drawn toward another cliff face. This one's deeper in the city, past the temples and the trade roads, where the wind quiets down and the walls narrow and like they're trying to keep a secret. And in that secret, you discover a tomb with a couch. It's almost comical now how often this pattern repeats. Petra might as well have been sponsored by some ancient stone furniture company. But this one's different, more elaborate. Raised up, with carved armrests and a backrest that curves in a way that suggests real comfort. You squint, then smile. This isn't just a bench, it's a dining couch. Which brings us to one of Petra's stranger historical side, Plot's funerary dining. Yes, it's a thing. In Nabataean culture, particularly among elites, there's evidence that honoring the dead wasn't a quiet affair. It was a social one. People gathered not just to mourn, but to feast. These weren't sad, tear-stained rituals, they were banquets. Reclining, chatting, eating, all with the deceased chilling a few feet away in a tomb niche. You picture it, a small group gathered around this very couch, draped in loose robes, passing platters of figs and honeyed cakes. Someone pours date wine into clay cups. A singer hums an old melody. And someone's uncle starts snoring, already reclining a bit too comfortably. Historians still argue whether these meals were symbolic or literal, recurring or one-time events. Some believe the dead were thought to participate spiritually in the feast, present in essence, if not in body. Others suggest the food was purely for the living, a kind of catharsis through carbs. The Romans did something similar, reclining during meals at their triclinia. So did the Greeks before them. And given Petra's cultural mashup, it's not surprising the Nabataeans picked up the habit. Only, instead of stone couches in fancy dining rooms, they just carved them into tombs, casually. And these weren't just random additions. Many tombs have full, on-dining suites, flat serving surfaces, recessed shelves, even water drainage systems nearby. The implication: this was planned, ritualized, possibly even scheduled annually. Kind of like the world's sleepiest potluck. A fun tidbit here: in one tomb, archaeologists found residue from dates and crushed seeds, maybe leftovers from a feast thousands of years ago. Whether they were eaten by humans or rats is still debated. Historians argue everything. But the point is, someone brought food down here. On purpose. You reach out and touch the carved edge of the couch. It's worn smooth, the top just low enough to rest your forearms comfortably. If this was indeed a banqueting space, then thousands of people may have gathered here over generations, sharing food, telling stories, laughing in the presence of their ancestors. And that's kind of beautiful. You wander a little deeper into the chamber, where shadows thicken and your footsteps become soft echoes. There's another bench here. This one smaller and less elegant. Possibly for a servant. Or maybe a child. Or maybe it wasn't a bench at all. Just a shelf that time smoothed into a seat. It's all open to interpretation in Petra, where everything erodes into ambiguity. That, by the way, is part of the challenge for archaeologists. Stone doesn't come with instructions. There's no user manual for a tomb-couch combo, so they rely on context, comparisons, and a lot of educated guesswork. Which is why some fringe theories get creative. One idea suggests the couches were symbolic of heavenly rest, that to carve a reclining space near the dead was to ensure eternal comfort, kind of like being buried with your favorite recliner. But make it cosmological. A reserved spot in paradise, already warmed up and smoothed by the desert sun. Another theory. These were social markers. The bigger the bench, the more prestigious the person. And just like modern gravestones vary in size and flair, so too did Nabataean tombs. A two-person couch might signal a family tomb. A long banquet setup might suggest a high-ranking clan leader with lots of friends, or at least lots of mourners. But then you stumble on something else entirely. Outside the tomb, set into a nearby wall, is a single simple seat. Just one. No decoration. No shelf? Facing away from the city, toward the cliffs, a watcher's seat. No one knows for sure what it was meant for, but its placement suggests solitude. Maybe a mourner sat there, gazing out after a feast. Maybe a priest recited prayers from that spot. Or maybe it was a space for silence, for reflection, for letting the desert wind carry grief upward into the stone. You sit there for a moment, letting your eyes rest on the horizon, and you start to realize, for a city of the dead, Petra feels incredibly alive. Its benches and couches aren't just remnants of rituals, they're extensions of the people who used them. People who laughed, wept, reclined, and remembered. Because in the end, what is a carved sofa but a gesture toward comfort? A reminder that even in mourning, humans seek a place to rest their bodies. A soft edge in a hard world. And if you're going to dine with the dead, you might as well do it reclining. You descend from the tomb terraces, your legs slightly wobbly from all the uphill lounging. Back on Petra's main artery, the wide, sun-baked street that once throbbed with merchant feet and clattering hooves. You start to notice something that hadn't registered before. Not all of this is grand. Not every rock is sacred. Not every carving is deep. Some of it is just practical. And honestly, that might be the weirdest part of all. Because for all the hype about Petra's awe-inspiring facades, this place was also just a functioning city. And the more you look, the more you see traces of that everyday life. Storage rooms carved into cliffs, animal troves worn smooth, worn door thresholds, where people clearly stepped in and out 1,000 times. Even a few small hearths scorched into the sandstone, blackened like forgotten toast. This is where the Nabataeans really get you. They were masters of boring beauty. They didn't just build temples. They built working plumbing. And if that doesn't earn your respect, nothing will. You duck into one of the quieter alcoves off the main path. The walls are close and curved, almost cozy, and right there on the side is yet another stone ledge. This one perfectly level, waist-high, stained from generations of use. Not a couch, not a shrine, probably just a countertop. You're basically standing in an ancient utility room. Historians still argue whether these side chambers were homes, shops, or workshops. The answer is likely yes. Petra wasn't all priests and tourists. It had artisans, cooks, repairmen, people with tool belts, not scrolls. And they carved their workspaces into the same stone as the kings did. No zoning laws in Petra, just vibes. You move deeper into what might have been a workshop, judging by the narrow benches and smoothed grooves in the walls. Someone probably spent long hours here, hammering bronze, sewing leather, or grinding flour. The lighting isn't great, but the air's cool, and you can imagine a rhythm to the work. Steady, repetitive, peaceful in that way only boring tasks can be. A fun fringe theory. Some scholars believe the Nabataeans had designated nap rooms. Not officially, but socially. Rooms carved into the shaded sides of cliffs, narrow and breezy, just big enough to curl up in. Given how brutally hot Petra gets at noon, it's not hard to imagine the whole city taking a siesta while the sun did its worst. And you can bet those napping nooks had benches too. Smooth, low, slightly recessed. Rock beds for the weary and well-hydrated. Another tidbit, some of Petra's homes had double, layered water systems. Cisterns above and basins below. You could collect rainwater during the rare storms and let it slowly seep down to cool the rooms beneath. Imagine lying on a rock couch under one of those, listening to trickling water as you drowse off. Honestly, kind of dreamy. And still, you find more carved seating. Near a cracked doorway, there's a shallow half, bench just inside the threshold. Was it for removing sandals? Waiting your turn to speak with the head of the household, or maybe for elders to sit and gossip about who's late bringing the olives. Petra's couches are like ancient Swiss Army knives. Multi-purpose, hard to categorize, and surprisingly elegant. They show up everywhere, from temples to tool sheds, reminding you that comfort wasn't just for the rich. It was for anyone who had time to carve and reason to rest. One section of the city, what might have been a residential block, is full of these mid-size carvings, not tomb-sized, not temple-grade, just normal, usable, carved into outer walls or just inside cave-like homes. And here's where the Nabataean genius really shines. Most of them are angled slightly toward the door, catching light in the morning and shade in the afternoon. Which means someone thought about the sun's path. Someone said, let's make this bench nice to sit on at breakfast. In a desert. 2,000 years ago. That's not just smart, that's cozy. You sit on one of these residential benches. It's short, a little uneven, probably worn down from generations of butts. But it feels, right, like it belongs here, in this dusty little canyon that somehow functioned as a living, breathing neighborhood. And it makes you wonder, why don't modern cities build like this? Why don't we carve rest into our architecture? In Petra, seating isn't furniture. It's infrastructure. It's everywhere, built into the very concept of space. It isn't added later. It is the room. And while we can't know every purpose these benches served, it's clear they made life easier, smoother, maybe even kinder. There's something deeply comforting about that. Not just that someone once sat where you're sitting, but that they planned for someone to sit there. That they carved a place for pause in the middle of motion, and as you stand and stretch, ankles cracking, shoulders dusty, you realize something else. See, maybe the real mystery of Petra's sofas isn't why they exist. Maybe it's why we stopped making them. The afternoon light slips into gold as you wander farther from the main path, drawn by a mix of curiosity and the faint promise of another unexpected sofa. You're off the tourist trail now, following a sloping path that seems less like a route and more like a suggestion. Around you, the cliffs close in, painted with streaks of red, orange, and the occasional band of purple. It's like someone took a sunset and decided to trap it in stone. And then you see it. A wall. Not one of Petra's polished facades, but something rougher, more informal. No grand entrance, no dramatic pillars. Just a blank rock face scarred with dozens of shallow carvings. At first, they look like scratches. But as you step closer, the scratches begin to make sense. This isn't just erosion, it's graffiti. Ancient graffiti. Your fingers trace a carved spiral, simple, neat, about the size of a teacup saucer. Next to it, a crude image of what might be a camel, or a deer, or a very confused dog. And next to that, Nabataean script hastily etched. You don't read ancient Nabataean, but you can tell this wasn't some royal decree. It was personal. Casual. Someone saying, I was here. These markings are all over Petra, especially in the quieter corners. Historians still argue whether they were sacred petitions, names of visitors, or just plain doodles. Some are high up, clearly meant to be seen. Others are low to the ground, like someone squatted down with a sharp stone and got bored. One fringe theory, that the graffiti was part of a rite of passage. That maybe young men or rebellious teens had to carve their name or a symbol into Petra's cliffs to prove something. Adulthood, skill, or just a good sense of aim. You can picture a group egging each other on, cheering when someone manages a clean letter or a daring little goat sketch. You spot another series of marks farther down the wall. This one different. Fainter. A sequence of horizontal lines, almost like tally marks. Was someone counting days? Recording something sacred? Or maybe it's the Nabataean version of hang in there. Tick marks on a workday. Then comes the most unexpected find, yet a carved figure reclining on what is unmistakably a bench. It's cartoonish. Lopsided. Definitely not royal art, but there's a charm to it. The figure has what might be an arm draped behind its head, one knee bent, the whole pose impossibly smug. This was someone having fun, or maybe being cheeky, or maybe just carving a self-portrait mid-nap. The idea that ancient people were funny always feels like a revelation, but of course they were. They had bad days, good jokes, weird obsessions. One study of Petra's graffiti even found repeated symbols that might have been personal marks, like prehistoric usernames, and a few archaeologists think some images might have been memes. Not our memes, but symbols or sketches that carried shared meaning or inside jokes. The idea of a Nabataean meme wall. Delightfully probable. You sit down on another convenient bench naturally, just beside the wall. From here, the carvings come into focus differently. Not as a jumble, but as a conversation. Layers of expression. Years of markings stacked over one another, like a canyon diary. Each line a whisper, not of power or religion, but of personality. It shifts your whole perception of Petra. This wasn't just a city of tombs and temples. It was a city of people who couldn't resist leaving their mark. Who carved not because they had to, but because they wanted to. A city full of stone sofas and stone selfies. And then you find the weirdest mark yet, a set of tiny feet. Not footprints, those would make sense. These are carved feet. Just two, side by side, as if someone wanted to leave behind their own little stand. Here's where I was. These were my feet. I stood. I saw. I left. Historians still argue whether such markings were symbolic offerings or just an artistic tick, but one theory suggests they were part of travel rituals, that traders or pilgrims would mark their presence at Petra with a personal symbol. Feet, hands, initials, a way of saying, this was my path, and you realize Petra is not just carved from the stone, it's carved into the stone. Every sofa, every shelf, every doodle and spiral, it's not decoration, it's documentation. A city not just built, but written into its own walls. You rest your hand against the graffiti, covered face, feeling the shallow grooves beneath your palm. It's strangely intimate, like holding the hand of someone who's been gone for 2,000 years but left you a note anyway. And maybe that's what all this is. The benches, the drawings, the scratched symbols in forgotten corners. They're not just history, they're little invitations to sit, to look, to laugh, to remember. You follow the curve of a narrow canyon now, tracing the lifeblood of Petra, not the grand facades or faded carvings, but the true pulse that kept this city alive for centuries water. Beneath your feet, the ground shifts subtly, sloping down where the Nabataeans once channeled every drop of rain, every trickle of flood, into a vast, invisible infrastructure. And no, this isn't the flashy kind of history. It's pipes, gutters, drainage channels, the world's most ancient plumbing. But without it, there'd be no Petra. You crouch beside a carved groove in the rock, A simple ditch, narrow and deep, running alongside the path like a forgotten vein. At first, you think it's just erosion, but then you see the pattern, the way it hugs the curves of the rock, the way it splits and rejoins. This was planned, sculpted, maintained. The Nabataeans didn't just deal with the desert, they outsmarted it. This was a people who looked at arid cliffs and saw potential, who built not for grandeur first, but for survival. And somehow, they made irrigation sexy. They carved hidden channels behind walls, funneling water through a network of cisterns, reservoirs, and underground tunnels that kept Petra hydrated, even when the skies forgot how to rain. Historians agree, the city's true marvel isn't its treasury or its tombs. It's its water system, and it's everywhere. You spot another channel, this one running beneath a carved stone slab. Possibly a step, possibly a secret cover for a pipe next to it. A small, low bench. Surprise, surprise. You sit, naturally, and ponder the logic. Was this a resting place for workers? A lookout point to check the water flow? Or just another example of the Nabataean habit of building comfort into every part of the city? One quirky theory suggests Petra had hydration stations, spots along trade routes where travelers could refill jugs, splash their faces, maybe take a breather. The benches nearby weren't decorative, they were practical. Waiting areas, gossip corners. Mini oses carved with intent. You pass a cistern next, dark and deep, like the world's quietest well. It's built right into the stone, framed by a neat lip that would have once held a cover. The idea of someone lowering a bucket here, hand in the morning light, is almost too vivid. You can hear the water splash, the bucket creak, the soft exhale of someone glad to be done before the sun gets high. Petra had hundreds of these cisterns. Some were public, others were private, hidden within homes or courtyards. And the really clever ones, they were layered, catching overflow from upper pipes, filtering dust through natural rock sediment. It's like the Nabataeans took one look at their environment and said, challenge accepted. But all this cleverness wasn't just for survival. It was also for show. Some fountains in Petra were purely aesthetic, symbolic little water features placed near temples or in high traffic courtyards. And what did they build next to those fountains? Benches, obviously. Because nothing says civilized like watching water you can't touch while reclining dramatically in the sun. You stop at one such setup, a half-circle bench facing what would have once been a pool or basin. The water's long gone, but you can see the faint stains where it once rose and receded. It's a kind of ancient lounge spot. Part plaza, part passive air conditioning unit. Historians still argue whether these public water areas were religious, political, or just architectural flexes. But one thing is clear, they weren't hidden. The Nabataeans wanted you to see their water, to marvel at it, to understand that they weren't just surviving in the desert. They were thriving. And it worked. You recline on the bench, imagining yourself as a trader passing through. Hot, dusty, possibly annoyed at camel traffic. You stop here, wash your hands, splash your face, maybe strike up a conversation with someone already seated, watching the water shimmer in the light. The sound of it, a trickle, a bubble, would have been hypnotic, comforting, soothing in a way that not even silence can match. Another fun fact, in Nabataean religious texts, water appears often as a sacred force, life-giving, spirit-purifying, and many of Petra's temples are aligned with springs or subterranean streams, which means even the act of hearing water may have been spiritual, which makes these benches something more than just rest stops. They're thresholds, spots where physical comfort and spiritual calm overlapped. Where you could sit, feel the coolness seep through the stone, and let your soul breathe a little. You rise again, following the curve of the channel as it disappears into another cliffside. The benches fade into shadow, and the air carries a whisper of moisture. Imagined or real, you can't quite tell. But you know this much: Petra wasn't built to impress tourists. It was built to work. to hold water, to hold people, to hold space. And it did so with the kind of elegance that doesn't shout, it hums. You veer off the main artery again, this time into a quieter stretch of Petra, where the cliffs form alcoves and rooms with names that no one remembers. Here, the big facades disappear. No treasury, no temples. Just flat, weathered walls, dotted with openings that lead to places you're technically not supposed to enter. But let's be honest, that's where the interesting stuff always is. You duck into one of these spaces, expecting maybe a storehouse or a long, abandoned goat pen. What you find instead is a rock-cut room with a perfect rectangle carved into the far wall. And at its base, you guessed it, another stone seat. You sit down, because of course you do. This one's low and flat, almost awkward, and not positioned for any kind of scenic view. But that's what makes it interesting. It's too symmetrical to be random, too smooth to be natural, and just inconvenient enough to make you wonder, what exactly were the Nabataeans doing in here? Historians still argue whether spaces like this were private homes, meeting halls, or makeshift temples. There's almost no surviving furniture, just these carved benches and the occasional niche in the wall. But the volume of these carved rooms is staggering. Some archaeologists estimate hundreds, even thousands, of such spaces scattered throughout Petra's cliffs and ravines. And a huge number of them include, wait for it, benches. Which raises the question, did the Nabataeans just love sitting? Or were these benches multifunctional? Maybe both. One prevailing theory is that some of these stone seats weren't seats at all, but beds. Sleeping platforms. Petra's climate meant homes didn't need roofs. Many rooms were just carved chambers with built-in benches that doubled as beds. You wouldn't bring furniture in. You made it right into the stone, which means you're now lounging on someone's 2,000-year-old mattress. A fringe theory, because we love those, suggests that some benches functioned as ceremonial altars. Horizontal surfaces where offerings were placed, not for sitting, but for symbolism. The line between couch and altar gets blurry real fast when you're dealing with sandstone and lost cultural context. You move into another room, smaller, rounder. 3 benches line the walls like a cozy little forum. No decoration. No niches. Just stone. It feels oddly modern. You can a minimalist meditation room. You can imagine 3 people sitting here in a triangle, talking softly. Or chanting. Or arguing. Or maybe just resting after a long day of lugging pottery and dodging sunstroke. And that's when you start noticing patterns. A lot of Petra's carved rooms are designed for reclining, not sitting upright. The benches are long, slightly tilted, just high enough for the average Nabataean to stretch out, elbow propped, looking effortlessly thoughtful. Like they invented the desert version of a chaise lounge. In some rooms, you see grooves in the wall above the benches, possibly for hanging fabric or canopies. Shaded, cushioned stone sofas. Now we're talking luxury. This isn't survival anymore. This is interior design. And yet, even the most modest rooms have these features. It's not just the rich. Petra's architecture democratized comfort. Whether you were a priest or a potter, you had a place to sit, lie down, think. It's like the entire city was designed with one goal in mind: make reclining available to all. One quirky discovery. In a side room near the colonnaded street, archaeologists found remnants of what might have been a built-in water basin, right next to a stone bench. The implication: an ancient bathroom. Yep, a carved commode, possibly with a reading bench. Even your most mundane routines were elevated, literally, in Petra. Now, not all carved couches are equal. Some rooms contain benches too shallow to rest on. Some are positioned awkwardly high, likely not for seating at all. Those may have been shelves, altars, or even platforms for goods. But the line between bench and shelf is thinner than you'd think, especially when erosion and interpretation team up to confuse us. Historians still argue whether these multi-purpose stone features reflect religious practice, domestic design, or communal identity. The answer is probably yes to all, In Petra, function and symbolism didn't fight, they fused. A couch wasn't just a couch. It was a ritual seat, a nap zone, a social hotspot, a public statement. You pass one final chamber today. This one has a square opening in the ceiling, like a skylight, and a carved ledge that wraps around three sides. It feels like a communal lounge, an open-air forum. Maybe a space for storytelling or teaching or awkward first dates. And in the middle, a recessed square, just deep enough for a table or fire pit. It hits you all at once. This isn't a city built to impress outsiders. It's a city carved for insiders. Every room, every bench, every oddly angled nook is about use, about community, about the rhythms of life lived close to the stone, eating, sitting, sleeping, talking, all carved in. And now you're part of it. Just another traveler, perched on a 1,000-year-old bench, wondering how something so practical could feel so profound. The next morning, you're up with the sun. Because in Petra, dawn isn't just a time of day, it's a temperature window. You stretch, a little stiff from your impromptu stone mattress the night before. Yes, you tried napping on one of the benches. Don't lie, and make your way toward a side valley where fewer tourists wander and even fewer maps bother to label. Here, the stone feels different, less refined, less symmetrical. You pass shaped chambers, rough, hewn niches, and, most interesting of all, benches that look like they were abandoned mid-carving. One juts from a wall at an odd angle, barely more than a ledge. Another has a backrest but no seat, like someone stopped chesseling halfway through a Netflix episode and never returned. You've entered Petra's unfinished zone, which, depending on your outlook, is either a construction site or an archaeological mystery buffet. These half-carved rooms are all over Petra, some tucked high into cliffs, others clustered near water sources, still others hanging off the sides of canyons like architectural afterthoughts. Historians still argue whether these incomplete spaces were due to interrupted projects, shifting population needs, or something more dramatic. Economic collapse, political upheaval, or, Roman takeover. But the truth? No one's quite sure. And these unfinished benches, they're the strangest clues of all. You approach one, a ledge barely a foot high, too shallow to sit on comfortably, yet clearly not a shelf. The rock around it is chiseled just enough to imply intention. Someone meant for this to be a couch. They just didn't finish it. Did the carver fall ill? Did funding dry up? Did a better lounge spot open up down the canyon? One quirky theory says these were training pieces, practice runs for new artisans. Like Nabataean apprentices learning the fine art of ergonomic stone furniture. You can picture it, a grizzled old master scowling as a teenage apprentice carves a lopsided armrest. No, that'll give you shoulder cramp. Start over. Or maybe these were test benches for clients. Sample pieces before committing to a full carve. The ancient equivalent of a showroom floor, but there's a more poetic possibility too. That these benches weren't abandoned, but simply left open-ended. That the act of starting a carving had meaning, even if it wasn't finished, a symbol, an offering, a statement of intent, frozen in stone. Petra is full of these half-measures, tomes with facades but no interior, rooms with stairs leading nowhere, benches too short to rest on. It's like catching a city mid-sentence. You climb to one such space, high above the main drag. The path is barely marked, more goat trail than sidewalk. But when you arrive, breath catching in the dry air, you find a shallow chamber with a single, long line carved along the wall. Just a line, not deep, not wide, like someone started to trace the shape of a couch, and then stopped. It's weirdly moving, the kind of incomplete that feels intentional, like the stone is holding a breath it never let out, and you can't help but sit anyway, on the bare ledge, legs dangling, back resting on warm sandstone. You look out over Petra from this unfinished perch, and it hits you, sometimes the things we don't finish say, as much as the ones we do. The Nabataeans weren't working with blueprints or city councils. They were carving living spaces into cliffs. changing the terrain as they went. Maybe they planned a room, started it, realized the sun hit wrong or the wind tunneled too sharply, and moved on. Left the sofa half carved, an architectural shrug. Petra wasn't static, it was adaptive, iterative. They didn't need it all to be perfect. Just useful. Just good enough for now. Another fun discovery. Some unfinished benches have markings around them. Lines drawn or chiseled into the rock, possibly guides for how the bench was meant to look. Like early drafts, as if the cliffs of Petra once held an entire sketchbook of human intention. Historians still debate whether these guide marks were communal, shared notes between craftsmen, or deeply personal. The whispers of one mason trying to get it just right. A quiet conversation between tool and stone. And maybe that's what makes these incomplete pieces so powerful. They're relatable. They remind you that ancient people weren't all finished products either. They had deadlines, distractions, second thoughts. And sometimes they walked away from a project mid-carve because dinner was ready or their chisel broke, or they just weren't feeling it. You sit there a long time, watching the sun creep across the canyon walls, casting golden light on benches that never got to be benches, and you wonder, what did those craftsmen dream of as they worked? Did they picture someone reclining here, laughing, resting, remembering? Or did they know all along they might never finish? Either way, they left something behind. Not perfection, not completion, but the beginning of comfort. You descend slowly from the high ledge, the air cooler now, the light gentler. Petra is starting to exhale. You feel it in the quiet between your footsteps, in the soft hush of breeze brushing past ancient walls. The city seems emptier than ever, and not just because the tourists have cleared out, it's something deeper. A lingering absence. And then the question lands, as it inevitably does, where is everyone? Why is this place so profoundly, perfectly deserted? Petra isn't a ruin in the traditional sense. No fires gutted its temples. No invading army razed its homes. It simply emptied out, like a great exhale that never breathed back in. Historians still argue whether Petra was ever truly a city, in the modern sense. Some believe it was more of a ceremonial center, a seasonal hub that swelled during festivals and trade cycles, then quieted in between. Others think it was a thriving urban capital, complete with neighborhoods, schools, and markets that eventually faded due to shifting trade routes and natural disasters. A major earthquake in the 4th century certainly didn't help. Neither did the rise of sea-based trade, which slowly strangled the overland incense routes Petra had once dominated. When the money stopped flowing, so did the people. And eventually, the benches stopped being used. But even as you walk these abandoned corridors and hollow rooms, something still feels inhabited. Not by people, exactly, but by memory. You pass another carved sofa, this one crumbling at the edge of a tomb. The seat's barely there, just a soft impression now, like someone pressed into memory foam 2,000 years ago and never got up. It's haunting. Comforting, empty in the most intimate way. And yet Petra wasn't totally lost. The local Bedouin knew it, lived in it, cared for it in ways outsiders didn't understand. Even after European explorers rediscovered Petra in the 19th century, the site remained part of a lived landscape. Stories passed down, names for places tourists couldn't pronounce, pathways known not by GPS, but by shadow and wind. You walk now through a broader plaza, surrounded by what were once grand homes or civic buildings. They're husks now, of course, but elegant ones. The benches here are longer, curved, maybe communal. It's easy to imagine public gatherings, speeches, arguments, laughs, a toddler scrambling up and down the ledge while parents pretend not to notice. A fun tidbit: one of these larger benches bears a carving that some believe was added centuries after Petra's peak, possibly by travelers or pilgrims. A kind of postscript etched onto a civilization's abandoned lounge. It's faint, but it's there. Proof that even as the city fell silent, people kept stopping, sitting, wondering, You sit too, letting your legs dangle off the edge of one long sun-warmed bench. You look around, and for the first time, you start to see the ghost city. Not in a spooky way, but in a deeply human one. Petra's emptiness isn't eerie. It's respectful. Like a stage set after the play, waiting for the next cast. Which makes every stone couch feel more poignant. These weren't symbols of decline. They were snapshots of presence. The people may be gone, but their choices remain. Chiseled, worn, softened by wind and time. And maybe that's the point. Petra's not a mystery to be solved. It's a rhythm to be heard. Every unfinished chamber, every graffiti doodle, every recliner half buried in sand. It's all part of a slow, quiet music that only plays when you stop moving long enough to hear it. You walk past one final chamber today, a narrow crevice with a ledge barely wide enough for a single person. It faces a rock wall, no view, no decoration, just a place to sit, alone, you do. And in the stillness, something clicks. Maybe Petra was never meant to be lived in the way we imagine. Maybe it wasn't about permanence, but pause. Not about residency, but return. A place to pass through, to rest, to remember. And maybe that's why the benches are everywhere. Because sitting is what this city was for. And now, it's just waiting for you to sit too. You rise slowly from the solitary bench, brushing sandstone dust from your hands, and begin walking again. This time with the quiet certainty that Petra isn't finished with you. There's still one last question echoing through the cliffs, louder with every turn of the path. Why? Why so many couches? Why did the Nabataeans, traders, engineers, sunburnt geniuses, carve more stone benches into their city than most modern towns have bus stops? Historians still argue whether these lounges were sacred, social, or status-driven. Some say it's all just function. Others that it was symbolism. Still others believe it's style. But the truth might sit somewhere in the blend. Because, as with all human things, it's rarely one reason. It's layers. You wander now through one of the lesser-known corridors of Petra. A shaded gorge peppered with niches, alcoves, and yes, more carved sofas. These ones are the trickiest yet. Some are half hidden, others cut at strange angles, barely deep enough to recline. And each one feels like a puzzle piece with no adjacent pieces nearby. One of them looks downright whimsical. Carved with a wavy backrest, it curves into the stone like a smile. You can almost hear the sculptor saying, "Let's make this one different." Was it a joke? A signature? A personal flair? Whatever it was, it reminds you that Petra's stone isn't just ancient. It's alive with personality. You sit once more, now deliberately. Not out of fatigue, but curiosity. Because the more you recline here, the more these benches seem to offer answers. Not loudly, but in suggestions. What if this was status? Not just for the elite, but for anyone who wanted to say, "I belong here." A bench wasn't just a seat, it was a stake in the rock. A claim. A form of Nabataean real estate. You look around and realize that some of these seating areas are carved into hard-to-reach places. Tucked high into cliffs or squeezed into narrow ledges. Not practical, not accessible. But maybe that's the point. If you could afford to commission a sofa into a stone wall, especially in a prime scenic location, maybe it meant something. Maybe it was your version of beachfront property. Fringe theory break. A few archaeologists believe some of the benches were coded, part of a symbolic system we no longer understand. Their shapes, angles, even positioning might have signified clan identity, spiritual beliefs, or even celestial alignments. Like star maps you could sit on. There's some support for this. Certain benches align with solstice sunbeams or mirror features across canyons. It's like the Nabataeans were building a landscape of meaning we're only just starting to decode. But others push back. They say we're overcomplicating things. That maybe, just maybe, the Nabataeans were tired. That sitting was survival. That in a world without air conditioning or folding chairs, carving a bench was the logical, decent thing to do. And when you've got sandstone and time, why not make it comfortable? You recline deeper into your current seat, noticing the subtle slope that lets your back rest just so. Your neck fits the curve. Your knees bend right at the edge. This was designed. Someone tested it, adjusted it, approved it. And there's something else. Every time you sit in one of these ancient sofas, you feel grounded. Not just literally, but emotionally. Like Petra wants you to slow down. To rest. To listen. These benches weren't rushed. They were shaped slowly by hands that understood patience. And maybe that's what we've lost. In our world of plastic chairs and overbooked schedules, we forget what it means to carve out rest. The Nabataeans didn't. Their couches weren't add-ons. They were foundations. Planned, permanent, irremovable. You don't move a stone sofa. You move around it. You build your life knowing that space exists for rest. You pass one final row of seats, carved side by side like a theater, facing a flat wall. It's not decorated. It's not scenic. But it is arranged, clearly meant for a group, maybe a lesson, a prayer, a shared silence. Whatever happened here, it involved people sitting together, facing the same direction. And somehow, that's enough. You stand now, slowly, feeling the echo of every seat you've tried, every bench that cradled your bones, every ledge that once held a moment. Petra's not a museum, it's a lounge, a carved reminder that rest isn't laziness, it's legacy. So whether these benches were sacred thrones, practical rest stops, or desert flexes, the truth is, they were all of that. Sacred, stylish, and still here, waiting. You follow the final trail west, your steps tracing a path less traveled, where the wind carves whispers into stone, and even the air feels older. The cliffs rise like tired giants now, their faces streaked with centuries, their edges worn into size. It's quieter here, not because the echoes have stopped, but because they've settled. Like everything in Petra, even sound seems content to rest. And then you see it. The last bench? There's nothing dramatic about it. No shrine, no inscriptions, no ceremonial chamber. Just a stone seat tucked into a low wall, angled perfectly to catch the late afternoon sun. It doesn't even pretend to be symbolic, it just is, unbothered. Unpolished. Unfinished even. But undeniably a place to sit. You lower yourself onto it like you've done a dozen times now. But this time it feels different. Not because the seat is smoother or the view better, but because you know this is the end. Of the trail, of the benches, of Petra's long invitation to slow down and listen. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the warmth soak in. The stone remembers the sun. And maybe, just maybe, it remembers everyone who ever sat here before you. And now comes the final drift. The wind down. The soft ending that Petra, of all places, has earned. The breeze hums through the canyon like a lullaby, carrying grains of sand and the secrets of ancient masons. The cliffs no longer loom. They lean. Protective, not imposing. The light dims, stretching golden arms across your lap as the sun dips below a ridge. You notice how your breathing slows to match the stillness. How the rock beneath you doesn't feel cold or hard anymore. It feels steady. Like it's holding you up. Yes, but also holding you in place. Like it wants you to stay a moment longer. To not rush the end. Petra has always been a place of pause. The Nabataeans knew it. The stone benches knew it. And now, you do too. All around you, unfinished chambers soften into silhouette. Sofas blur into ledges. Memory bleeds into myth. The sharp lines of function melt into something gentler, softer, like the edge of sleep. You remember that first bench, near the treasury. The sun-baked thrones in the tombs. The shaded dining couches where the dead and the living once shared bread and silence. The graffiti that laughed from the walls. The bench by the forgotten pipe. The one with the view. The one with the feet. And now this one. Your very own cliff, couch. Carved into warm, echoing stone. A seat not just in the desert, but of the desert. You imagine picking up a chisel. Making a little mark, not to change anything, but to belong. To say, I sat here. I rested. I saw. And maybe, as you drift into sleep, you'll dream of carving your own bench. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere high. Somewhere the sun hits just right. Your personal place of pause in a world that never stops. Because the Nabataeans were right. Rest is sacred. Comfort is power. And even in the hardest places, we deserve somewhere soft to land.